I'm going to be waiting. This is Ron Lynn, the moderator. I'll be waiting another couple minutes. People are logging in from all over the world, and I want to give them a chance to listen to this incredible presentation. Well, good day to all of you. I know our time zones are somewhat drastically different, and I will spare you the dad jokes I always have lined up and get right to the topics. We are going to be focusing on soft skills today. In other words, the skills that are actually transportable, not only through different disciplines, but across national boundaries and even ethnic diversity. We're talking about communication, motivation, goal setting, and budgeting. There are many more soft skills, and we will have presentations in the future. These are unlike the hard skills that we constantly have classes on. Those include engineering, fire protection, mathematics, and science. These soft skills represent our opportunity for our greatest personal and professional growth, as we tend to be weakest in these areas and do not go to college for them. First, for communications, I would like to introduce you to Stephen Kipp, who has been the director of Skip Consulting, an engineering and consulting firm. He has a master's degree in engineering and possesses additional postgraduate qualifications in fire safety and building project management. He is also a board member of the Australian Building Codes Board and an adjunct professor for the academic staff of the School of Engineering at Victoria University. Next, we have the distinguished Jui, speaking about motivation and mentorship. Jui leads the Building Plan and Universal Design Department of the Building and Construction Authority of Singapore. His core duties include oversight of building works in Singapore to ensure they are designed to comply with building regulations and constructed to the highest standards of safety, sustainability, and barrier-free accessibility. He is a registered architect in Singapore. To discuss goal setting, we are privileged to have Allison Cook. She is passionate about construction codes and helping others develop their career in the industry. She is the Permits Administration Manager for Arlington County, Virginia. Allison supervises the team of permit specialists responsible for coordinating, processing, and issuing over 20,000 permits each year. Allison has a master's degree in public administration and is currently the chair of the Code Council's Emerging Leadership Membership Council, which consists of some of the best and brightest young minds we have in the United States and elsewhere. For budgeting, we have a man who is willing to spend all your money. A good friend, Sam Palmer. He has been past president and longtime member of the Major Jurisdiction Council and currently is assistant director of the Clark County Building Department, responsible for permitting, plans examination, building inspection, engineering, and public response for all the structures in Clark County, which is some 7,600 square miles with a population exceeding 2.3 million and encompasses the Las Vegas Strip. He is current ICC Region 1 president and has worked in numerous exam design committees and has been a leader in developing best practices. And I'm Ron Lynn, and you don't really need to know who I am because I'm not saying anything. So with that, Stephen, it's to you. Wait, do we have a little more, another slide so I can get some housekeeping done? Ah, we good. Oops. This webinar will be recorded. We will have time at the end for discussion and questions. Audience members are muted with videos off by default. If you have a question, please use the Q&A function at any time to submit the question or indicate your interest in being recognized. We will either unmute you or respond to your question as you've written it. Next slide. There we go. The Global Membership Council connects building safety professionals from outside the United States with U.S.-based professionals who have an interest in advancing the cause of building safety internationally. Membership in ICC is not required. Initiatives include webinar series, global connection days, and network opportunities. I can only say from my point, I was over 35 years building and fire official for Clark County, Nevada. And a week didn't go by, I didn't get a call or an email from somewhere in the world asking how we handled certain strange problems. So we are all one team in this together. After the webinar, we will email responses to anyone who has entered a question into the chat box but did not receive a response during the webinar. Email new or follow-up questions to Jay Zabursky, whoever she is, at icc.org. You see it on there, copy it down. Thank you. All right. Are we ready for Stephen?
I'm ready, Ron, if you are.
I am.
Right. Thank you for the introduction and thank you for the opportunity to speak here today. For me, it's morning. For most of you, it's evening. So thank you for taking your time in a busy day. So as Ron mentioned, I'm going to talk about communication, and this is one of the most intangible soft skills, I guess. This is absolutely, as Ron said, what we don't learn at university. It's really the bits of our personality that we bring into the building industry, we bring into our roles, and understanding that other people are not like us, that we're not often the same as other people, and how we interact with people is really the most important way of being a successful building official. The first part of communication, of course, is language. I speak English as a first language, but I don't speak American English, so apologies if I don't exactly get my language right today. For example, if I mention a 4x2, I really mean a 2x4. But generally speaking, hopefully I'll be close enough to the correct language. So what I wanted to do is talk about what I think the three key parts of communicating if you're a building official are, and that's the ability to inform, to educate, and enforce. So the people we communicate with can be a customer, a consumer, a client, and sometimes the accused or a defendant. And sometimes they can be all of those on one project. So learning to know our clients, our customers, our consumers, or the recalcitrant builder, the owner builder, and to understand that these are not static traits and that the same person can sometimes be all of these on almost any issue is a really important part of our role. Just learning how humans interact in a regulatory framework is really the key skill we need to develop and hone over our careers. So I wanted to give you some examples that we use in Australia about rules of thumb, about compliance culture in society generally. So as a rule of thumb, and I think these figures will vary internationally, perhaps significantly in some areas, but as a concept, the principle works well. So in Australia, we would say, as a rule of thumb, 5% of the population will mostly not voluntarily comply with many laws because it's part of their personality. About 20% will almost always comply, and I would argue that almost all of us attending this seminar, including the presenters, are in that 20%. If you choose a career in enforcement and compliance, you clearly fit within that 20% group. So 5% struggle to comply, 20% will always comply because of that cultural and behavioural background. The things that we were brought into our professional lives primarily from our cultural and family environment. And the behaviour of the remaining 75%, so that's about 3/4, is determined by the actions or effectiveness of the regulator policing compliance. So think about that. 5% of the people we deal with are going to be very hard to deal with. 20% are going to be relatively easy to deal with. And the other 75%, we can influence their behaviour by how we deal with the 5%. And sure, those figures will vary from culture to culture. Some of the other speakers, I'm sure, certainly places like Singapore and Korea have very high compliance cultures, whereas countries like Australia and the US can have a slightly different perspective, but the concept works the same. A simple example is the speed limit. Even where laws and signage are clear, non-compliance is often high. My view is that it's because there's poor enforcement and poor understanding of the reasons for regulating. People generally speed because they think that the law is wrong or that for their particular circumstances, they're above the law. So part of the job of police is to inform, educate, and then enforce. But I wouldn't think anybody could disagree that the risk of accident from speeding is real. So why do people do it? Well, there's an apocryphal survey result that's used often. Apocryphal meaning I don't know if it's actually a real survey, but if you took a room full of people, you probably get the same result very accurately. And that's that if you ask drivers if they're better than average, then typically about 80% of the survey respondents will say that they're better than average. That describes human nature really well, I think. We all think we're better than average drivers, or most of us. So information, education, and enforcement action can easily and readily change majority behaviour or culture when regulators, us as building officials, turn the spotlight on an issue from time to time to decrease non-compliance, usually as a consequence of an adverse community safety outcome, but the 5% will often stubbornly resist. So just remember that perfection in compliance is actually quite hard to achieve. Our greatest soft skill is knowing when to inform, when to educate, and when to enforce. So, of course, in the building industry, that's a really compelling example. I think all of us will have examples of what I call the malleable three quarters, whose behaviour depends on how the 5% cowboys are held to account by the industry, and whether they believe that the laws are enforced will determine their behaviour. And of course, then there's the other 20% um, who will always do the right thing. But if we don't enforce compliance well, then the 20% most compliant building practitioners will start to lose work to the consolidated 80%. The 5% joins the 75%. And now we have 80% of practitioners performing at less than optimal levels. And that's what we call the race to the bottom problem that you see, where you see significant regulatory failure in jurisdictions. And we've certainly got some very significant examples of that in Australia at the moment. A simple little anecdote. My mentor taught me when I was a building inspector that not to trust builders at all until I felt they were performing professionally, and then to slowly give them some trust. And one of the things he said, which I never forgot, was that if you've got a builder and they've done something slightly wrong, they've got to add some extra rebar or move some coverage to some reinforcement steel, then if you think you can trust them, tell them they need to do it, but you will come back if you can. But if you don't come back, they can pour the concrete without your final sign off. And then always go back. And the builder's face when you drive into the driveway tells you whether they've done it or not. They can't hide their emotion, because if you are pulling into the driveway and they haven't fixed it, you're going to stop the site and they're going to have some heartache for the rest of that interaction with you. And if they've done the right thing, they're just going to wave to you and you can probably back straight out again. So coming back to those three criteria: inform, educate, and enforce. The skills we need. So information, feeding a person a fish, for example, using the analogy. Skills: clear, polite, friendly, and enthusiastic. The tools you need for that are knowledge of the subject matter, but relatively low-level knowledge: rules, code, standards, and experience. A professional library reference is really helpful. The ICC IRC flashcards from 2018 edition and the Building Department Administration 4th edition are really good examples of those professional tools that you could use in that information phase. I should say these skills also generally get better with age and experience and a good mentor. So if you're working in a space where you have an enforcement role, look for someone that you look up to and try and learn from them as much as you can. That example I gave you before is, I think, a compelling one. Look for people that you know do their job well and try and learn from them, from their human behaviour. Educate, explain how and why regulations exist. This is the most powerful tool we have as officials and as regulators. If you can reinforce in people a belief in why the regulation exists, they've got a much stronger chance of complying over their career. This is the teach a person to fish rather than feed them a fish concept. Again, clear, polite, friendly, and enthusiastic skills, but also confident and authoritative. This is where compliance is most effective, engaging with people to get them to understand and value compliance in a societal or economic sense. This is why it makes good business sense to comply. If you can instill that in people that you're trying to encourage to comply, then your job becomes much easier and the outcomes for the community are better. So this is the tools necessary here are a deep knowledge of the subject matter and an understanding of the reasons for regulating. For example, a couple of very simple examples: knowing that balustrade gaps are designed to prevent young children falling through them because they're top heavy. Children under 5, their head's the biggest part of their body, and if they stick their head through a gap in something, they will fall. They're top heavy. Knowing those things and imparting those things to builders, for example, can be very powerful. Most people have a very strong sense of protection around young people, but also things that regulations tend to be historically outdated. So humans are getting taller, people's feet are getting bigger. So things like handrail heights and stair widths need to be complied with, and our sense of variation to those should be less sympathetic. And again, if you can explain this well to builders, they won't forget it. They'll forget the number, they'll forget the handrail height or the stair width, but they won't forget the reason why they're doing it. And finally, in relation to that education concept, understanding the needs of others, understanding the needs of the opposite gender, for example, or people of all abilities. I teach at university and I try and teach architects about better toilet design, because male and female toilet numbers don't actually work across a 50-50 ratio like society exists, because there's actually a completely different social interaction around toilets. So again, try to understand that. If you ever get the opportunity to spend some time in a wheelchair going through a shopping centre, that will be an invaluable thing for you to do. And finally, enforcement. Sometimes we have to just be the bad guy, and that's necessary to protect the public interest and to make sure that rules are complied with. This is where, again, clear, polite, authoritative, but also acting within the rules of natural justice and fairness. We need to develop a sense of professional judgment. Now, this is where the professional toolkit gets very, very important. So, for example, slips, trips and falls regulation should be strictly enforced because, as I said, humans are taller, feet are bigger, but there might be some other leeway in regulations, things like energy efficiency, construction tolerances. So, for example, stair treads. In Australia, our building code actually has embedded in the code a plus or minus 5mm allowance, quarter of an inch allowance for tread widths. If you're part of a team, then an agreed set of guidelines for enforcement can make all of your jobs much easier and ensure consistency across the jurisdiction. But in the same way that when a policing officer pulls you over and you've been speeding, they have discretion to let you off if your speed was within a certain tolerance of the maximum speed limit. So again, if you're working in an office, try and develop some rules of thumb or tolerances for which regulations need strict enforcement and which regulations can have some variation. So in conclusion, our role is to inform, educate and enforce. The best way to do that is to be an observer of human behaviour so that we can understand and apply our skills in the most effective way, and therefore ensure the healthiest and safest outcomes for society in general. Thanks, Rob.
Thank you, Stephen. That was a great presentation. Ladies and gentlemen, I just want to say that communication, when I'm teaching, is the single most important part of code administration. The single most. I don't care how much knowledge you have. If you can't communicate it, it's worthless. I have a couple of the panelists who would like to contribute a little bit. Sam, what do you want to add?
Stephen, I think you hit it right on the nail. Communication is the key thing, especially on the job site, be that the verbal communication or the written communications. When you're on the job site and you're trying to go toe to toe or tay to tay with the contractor, yes, I view the contractor as part of the team, but I also want to make sure that he clearly understands what needs to be done and why it needs to be done. And as such, I may communicate verbally with him, but I turn right back around and I give him written communication too to document what was said. So hopefully there's no confusion in the long run.
Thank you, Sam. While we're waiting for a moment here, please, I encourage everybody in the audience to put in their questions if they have any, and we will get to them. Next, Jui, you had some comment you would like to make.
That's right. Yeah, I really like the idea that Stephen mentioned about informing, educating, and enforcing. I just want to echo Stephen's point about informing the industry. So even Singapore, okay, although we have a high compliance rate, but then we no longer can practice in a way whereby of being very high-handed in introducing a regulation and enforcing and imposing on the entire industry. So increasingly, we need to involve and educate the industry every step of the way. So when we are thinking about introducing a new rule or regulations or requirement, we will need to engage the various industry stakeholders that will comprise of the trades and associations and even chambers. Because some of the rules that we introduce can have a huge impact on the, say, private building developers. Okay, it can impact their sales launch and their preparations in their plan submission process. And also for the consultants, they may need time to understand, like you say, what is the genesis or the reason behind the regulation and make adjustment to their design practices. So in Singapore right now, we are very conscious about informing and engaging the industry stakeholders every step of the way. When we have a new requirement or new thought, we will engage them and seek their comments and feedback and make adjustment and refinement along the way. So, and finally, when we do impose or introduce the regulations, I think most of the industry, like you say, 80% or more would have, understood what is that about and would most likely be receptive towards that.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that input. As a matter of fact, you can continue because you are our next presenter.
Okay, yeah, thank you. So I think my topic is about motivation. Okay, so in my organization, there are corporate trainings for middle management like myself, such as supervisory skills and crucial conversations with staff to build up the core leadership competencies. There is also some sort of a mentoring program where selected younger officers are paired with senior leaders to learn about their knowledge and experience. But I must confess that in my organization, there isn't quite a specific training on motivation and mentoring. But among these, I do see there's common themes of engaging the individual staff, right, at the very personal level, facilitating teamwork, and also managing diversity. So with that undertone, I would like to just have my little presentation here, okay, about by sharing my experience about motivating my staff. So the slide that is being shown on the screen is just to set the context of the example that I'm going to share with you. Okay, right now Singapore aspires to be a smart nation that harness technology to transform the way our people and businesses live, work, and play. So as part of this larger goal, the Singapore government is making a lot of efforts to use digitalization to create policies, promote innovations, and also streamline some of our regulatory processes to improve productivity and our effectiveness in serving our citizens. So all these digitalization efforts are actually driving changes across various government agencies, including my organization, the Building Construction Authority, or BCA. The changes brought several challenges to my team and their work, and the transition, I must say, is fairly fast. My officers need to acquire new skill sets and in digital tools like building information modeling or BIM, adapt to new tech-enabled processes, and also learn how to work more collaboratively with other government agencies. So in summary, I would say the context is that the problem statement is really how can I, as a middle manager, motivate my staff to embrace this change and become a digitally confident workforce? So maybe you can move to the next slide. Yeah. So I would like to share my experience in tackling those challenges by discussing these three issues here that is shown on this slide here. So firstly, my department comprises of a group of younger officers and another group of older officers. They are generally trained in architecture or engineering. I realized that each group has different expectations, abilities, and mental models about digital transformation. So the younger ones tend to be more tech savvy and can bring new ideas and energy to the team. These are useful, but they can be less experienced, okay, but they like new challenges. At the same time, they generally expect quick rewards and progression in their career. So managing this younger group of officers, I tend to act more like a coach, okay, and to show support for their growth and development. So for example, I try to match their interests to suitable areas and also giving them opportunities to showcase their work. Then for the other group of older officers, tend to be more resistant towards change and picking up digital skills. I have to assure them that technology is not going to replace them at their work, okay? And as long as they recognize the need for change and to prepare, okay, to adapt. So with their very deep knowledge and experience, in particular, okay, in operational work like plan processing, okay, these older colleagues still have a vital role to play in our organization as our organization undergo changes. They may not be, I always tell them, they may not be superstar performer when it comes to digital project, but I told them they're actually my rock stars, okay? Rock stars who are like solid foundation, ensuring our bread and butter operations like plan processing are running smooth and stable. And in this regard, they are also very good mentors, okay, for our newer and younger officers. Then secondly, I noticed that motivational talk must occur at both at the individual level and as well as at the team level. At the individual level, I need to periodically engage each officer and spend genuine time, okay, to understand how they are doing and and also provide them the opportunities to give me feedback. I must say these conversations are I'm not always very happy, okay? And I find the most, but I do find that most officers are appreciative of this personal touch of a one-to-one engagement. Honestly, as a middle management myself, I find this rather energy draining because I have like a dozen or more officers. If I get to meet them one by one on a regular basis, it is rather time consuming. But so far, I think it has shown to be quite a worthy investment of my time, and it helps to bond with my officers, I would say. Then at the team level, I need to motivate my officers to work collectively as a department because many of the digitalization project emphasize on teamwork. So to keep the energy and momentum of the team going, I find useful to have very short but frequent team meetings to move work. Okay, it's also good to set very short-term goals and achieve quick wins, and as well as to celebrate those quick wins and achievement as a team. This helps to motivate the team. And lastly, as the head of the department, I think one of the best ways to motivate my staff is to walk the talk. Okay, so I attend BIM training myself. I try to be interested, okay, as much as possible, okay, in technology and gives full support to my staff to upskill and have the time to attend trainings. So the good thing is that my entire organization is also aligned in this effort. My boss and his boss do the same. Okay, they repeat and reinforce the change narrative. So in this way, the staff will feel that all the challenges they face, the work that they are doing, are actually part of a larger picture. And this helps to bring impetus and meaning to their work. That's a great way to motivate the staff. So in conclusion, I think from my experience in terms of digital transformation here in my organization, I think it's important to engage the staff at a personal level. The officers may be different in their personality and in their age group, but it's useful to motivate them also as a team by working with them very closely, step by step and regularly. And finally, I think we don't have to be so harsh on ourselves, okay? It's always helpful to look towards our senior management, okay, to be part of this whole conversation by communicating and reinforcing the impetus for change and then giving the necessary support that the team will need. Yeah, that's all I want to share today.
Thank you very much, Dewey. I have a question to you and actually to all the panelists. If you are a staff member that desires or needs some mentoring, what is the best way to communicate that to your supervisor without being a pain? I hope someone takes this.
That's a really
Let
tough
Steve.
question, Ron. So I'll have a go at it. Look, if you approach it in the right way, I think very few people would be not flattered to be asked to be a mentor to someone. So I think opening the discussion is easy, but choosing the person is the difficult part. You've got to find someone who is actually a good mentor. If you're in an organization where that doesn't happen, and frankly, we can all remember times where we've worked in organizations where there was very few people that we genuinely looked up to, but the organization was functional in that sense, then you might need to look outside of your narrow day-to-day work colleagues and find someone in your life, even an uncle or an auntie or a best friend that you can at least bounce ideas on, particularly the enforcement role. I think being a policing officer is not a natural thing for human beings, and it takes skill and experience to get the right balance. And Sam mentioned that before. It's the most difficult part of our job, when to be the good cop or the bad cop.
Any other panelists? Yeah, Sam.
You hit it, some of those things right on the nail on the head. Overall mentorship, some people are very dynamic and some people are very quiet. I think a lot of time when you're asking for mentorship, if you're dynamic, you're going to walk right up to somebody and say, hey, I need some help, or can you work with me on this or whatnot. But if you're not dynamic, some of the best ways to do it, we used to have technical groups. And in the technical groups, you would come together as a technical group, be that for retaining walls or for tall structures, whatever it may be. But within that group, you bounced ideas off each other. And then eventually you would find the right person that had pretty good answers or that you could relate to. And you could naturally build that rapport with that individual. you can probably start small and work your way into it, rather the more dynamic individuals just going to jump right over there and say, hey, mentor me. But taking it step by step and working your way in there is a great way of starting that mentorship program.
Most people are flattered to be asked to be a mentor. I have had the opportunity to think about it beyond the normal scope of activities. You may be looking at someone, particularly in the professional fields, that are outside of what we do, whether it's architect, engineering, code enforcement, etc. Uh, Example, I will use as the president of one of the casinos. I used him because of his vast experience, and we would meet once a month and just talk about things and issues that happened out in the real world. And I got tremendous insight. Allison, did we raise your hand? I couldn't
I
tell.
was. I do want to mention too, if you're within an organization where, you've reached out to folks, but maybe people are kind of overwhelmed with the day-to-day stuff or aren't in a position to mentor, ICC has some fantastic resources. I think this is where becoming a member of the Global Membership Council or building or fire or emerging leaders is a great way to get plugged in with folks in your industry, in your interest area. Like if you're looking for mentorship, ICC is also an opportunity to find people. I mean, it's been phenomenal for me both to find peers that I can relate to and to find people who've been in the industry, just a few years more than me, to provide some really great guidance. So I just want to plug that while we're all here, that there are a lot of membership councils and other resources you can reach out to.
Go ahead, Sam, please.
Bert, one quick question. Back in regards, you're talking about the motivation. In the past year and a half, 2 years during the COVID pandemic across the world, motivating staff, taking care of staff, mental health of staff. How did you keep your staff motivated?
Yeah, there's indeed a challenge. In fact, during this COVID period, many of us are working from home, right? I think going forward, it will never be the same again. Working from home will be part of a norm, or it will be a hybrid kind of working arrangement. So the challenge that I face is that we lack that kind of physical interaction and face-to-face contact. When you talk through a Zoom or WebEx like this, it is the personal touch is not there. But I do make efforts to make sure that I keep track of each individual officer's work. I make sure that I know what they're doing. I have regular what I call sync-up session with them. So in fact, since the pandemic, I will have regular sync-up sessions every morning, just half an hour with my team members, just to check how are they doing, how their work is doing, and also checking whether their families have gotten COVID and things like this. So we talk about some of this. So this sort of constant contact, make sure that they somewhat know I'm watching over them, and also there's a personal touch and care, for these workers.
Thank you. We've got another question from the audience, and it's kind of directed at Stephen, but I'm sure others can jump in. How do you deal with politicians who try to influence how you enforce the code? This is a common problem that we've all run into over our time experience enforcement. My enforcement started with Hammurabi, so I've been doing it a lot longer than most of you. Go ahead, Stephen. Chime in.
Yeah, Hammurabi was a king, Ron, and I think you're a king as well, so that's why.
Thank you.
I tried to answer that question, but the chat wasn't working well. So it's a really difficult question. When I worked in local government, for example, the mayor was building an apartment building. So that everyone's had that experience. My answer is this is where information and education is important. You have to engage with that political operative and try and explain the reasons why the regulations exist. But if that's not successful, then ultimately the politician wins, because politicians sit outside of the legal framework in that sense, and they can trump our decisions. So you need to document the decision. And I know people are going to say, well, hang on, but what if it's a safety issue? If it's a safety issue and you feel strongly about it, then most countries in the world have whistleblower legislation or protections, or ombudsman's offices or things like that. But I would caution everybody that those pathways are very troublesome, because generally speaking, whistleblowers don't have a long, healthy career after that event. But if it's a safety issue and you believe strongly about it, then you need to go over the head of the politician, but don't do that without seeking much advice from mentors and other colleagues, because mostly the politicians have the power and we don't. I'm sure others might. Sam, can you add something to that?
Good comment. You know, in Las Vegas, Sin City, at one point in time, we had 4 out of 7 of our county commissioners in jail. And, so it happens. Nowadays, we have very good councilmen and whatnot and commissioners, and they're very pleased. But through time, and Ron led the charge on this a long time ago, through time, we codified or at least wrote down policies and procedures for a lot of different things. And people say, hey, why did you do that? Why do you have so much paper? Why do you have so many P&Ps out there? Well, it's sort of a fallback, because it shows the politicians, or it shows whoever's putting the pressure on you, wait a second, we've got a defined methodology for this, whatever it may be. We've got a defined methodology. We follow our P's and P's. If you want to go around and circumvent those P&Ps, okay, but we're going to do that at an open. And at the next council meeting, here it is. If you want to deviate, so be it. That's your call. You're the councilman. But we're going to do it in the open, and you're going to take a vote on it, and away we go. But codifying and or writing down a lot of our P&Ps has really helped us on that situation.
And I think the greatest challenge for us is that we deal mostly with low probability, high consequence events, fire being the classic case, but also the collapse of the tragic collapse of that apartment building in Florida. So explaining to people that just because something hasn't happened doesn't mean it won't happen is quite difficult. And that's the most difficult education challenge, explaining to people that whilst risks in society are typically getting, most of the societies that are represented here today, our countries are getting safer and safer, but it doesn't mean that these risks are disappearing. And that's the great challenge, trying to explain to politicians that this event could happen in your political cycle.
That structure held up for 40 years, and that's their game plan. But that's not always the way it happens.
No.
But as soon as that thing happened, within a week's time, from the major jurisdiction committee point of view, we had phone calls. All of us had phone calls from our local councilmen, mayors, et cetera, saying, "Hey, what about us? Could that building collapse in our area?" And those are challenges. Yeah.
It couldn't, because we had a program in place. Hopefully.
Well, in Australia, one of the things we have is a significantly increasing risk from wildfire, we call it bushfire, because of climate change, and engaging politicians to understand that this risk is actually rapidly increasing, and we have more and more of the population in areas that weren't high risk and are now high risk has been a real dilemma. But frankly, most of these things, as we all know, we codify by catastrophe. King Hammurabi learnt this from. So we sometimes have to wait for that tragic outcome for politicians to engage and take action. But thanks for that question from Blas. That was really the most difficult role of a building official, what to do when the boss steps in and taps you on the shoulder and says, just move sideways at the moment.
See, before we go on to the next question, because we got to get moving, I have to impart a little bit of what my advice is. I used to talk to the elected officials all the time, state, federal, certainly locally, and I explained to them that it's so much easier just to blame that jerk Ron Lynn for what you're having to do than to take the responsibility themselves. And that worked. So with that, we're going to our next speaker. Allison, it's all yours.
Thank you so much. So I think we have a little brief presentation to put up here. So I wanted to start off with the idea of SMART goals. This is fairly popular in America, but I realize this might not exist around the country, around the rest of the world, or y'all might have different acronyms for it. But the concept is that you want to set your goals up in a way that you are very specific about what you're trying to do. You can actually measure that to see if you're meeting that goal. It's something you can achieve. It actually makes sense for the job, and that you have time parameters around it. So a classic one that a lot of folks will be familiar with is plan review. You don't want to say, I'm going to review your brand new residential house the next day after you turn it in. Maybe you do. That isn't happening in Arlington County. We have hundreds of houses built every year, plus we're staggering those in between all kinds of other renovation projects. And so you want to create things where you have very set, realistic goals. And I want to spend some time after we go over some examples from Arlington County's permit administration team about 2 goals we have, to talk about how that also overlaps with the other topics of today of communication, budget, and motivation. But this is just a general reference here about what are we talking about when we have goal setting, and what are some things you can lean on when you try to create your own goals. So that's a good segue to our next slide, where we can kind of look at what does an average month in Arlington County look like. And what you're seeing up here is a little pie chart where each of these segments represents one of my team members who is responsible for the intake of all our permits and reviewing them to decide, do you have the right licensure? Do you have the minimum stuff to turn in to get started for plan review, as well as issuing our permits, checking fee issues, making sure that the description of work makes sense on the permit. And so you'll see on my team, I have some folks like the person name 1 there, who I scrubbed the names off for privacy's sake, did over 400 permits in the month of January. And I've got somebody else over there, name 6, who did only 123. They had taken some vacation time. And so part of this is realizing, you've got a diverse set of teams. Some people are going to be rock stars, some people are going to be rock solid, and some people might need some coaching. And so when you set your goals, you want to do something that is achievable for the majority of your team and does stretch or encourage you in some areas too. You also want to make sure that you set goals that aren't going to create their own problems. And so the first goal I'm going to talk about on the next slide here that we have for my team is processing times. We have thousands of permits every year. And so one of the goals we have is that 90% of our permits are approved or rejected for just the intake portion. Do you have the right license? Do you have the minimum documents within 1 business day, and 100% within 2 days? Because this is going to be the holdup to get to plan review. And we also want to make sure we keep a similar metric when we're at the end after plan review is done, when we need to give you the permit out the door, but we do that last check to make sure, hey, I'm not sending out something out the door that doesn't have the right contractor, that we're, missing a critical form or piece of information that's going to hold you up in inspections. And this partners nicely with a goal we'll talk about later after I share some numbers on this from our team. But you want to have, what we have here is, it's very specific. Hey, what's the time period? And it's achievable. We can do 90% of this. You're not going to get 100% the same day or the next day, because nothing's 100%. You may need to talk to a supervisor. You may need to check in. But these are very specific, very clear. If you move to the next slide, we measure this at a team level, which you can see here. So you can see the left-hand column is our types of permits. So we have commercial new structures, we have additions, alterations, same set for residential, and then we have fire protection systems, mechanical and electrical permits. And so we look across all the permit types for how many are getting done in 1 business day, how many in 2, same with issuance, and we have a plan set creation process as well. And that gives us an idea about how my whole team is functioning. And then I also have this at the individual level. And I look at every quarter, okay, I've got somebody who is consistently doing this, is doing a great job, and I've got somebody who is only at 70%. What's going on here? Do they need more coaching, support? And so it's good to have the team picture and your each individual staff picture. And while this is about permits processed, this same concept could apply to how many plan review are you getting done at the same time. And this also aligns with what we're sharing with our customers about our goals. We're telling our customers, you will get your permit sent to plan review within this time period. And we're telling them plan review will take these time periods for these project types. So it's important, though, that we balance quantity and time of work with quality of work. And so with this, we have the next goal that I want to share as an example goal, that you also need to make sure you're checking quality. It's not really great if you processed 100 permits today if all of them were wrong. If you didn't check and they didn't have the minimum plans, and now they're going to sit in plan review for 2 weeks before a plan reviewer says, hey, you're building a brand new house and all you gave me was a plat. That's not going to help anyone, and it's going to make for some very frustrated customers. So We balance this out with a quarterly quality assessment, and we use a similar assessment as we're training people up to make sure, like, okay, you understand how to process. We start with plumbing, mechanical, electrical permits. You understand how to process that? Great, now you can move on to residential building permits. And if you go to the next slide, this shows you what we have a checklist for the team for every permit type. So this is a little bit small. I apologize that it didn't quite translate to this presentation, but on building permits, for my team, we have a 23-item checklist, and each of them you can expand and say, okay, what is this? So the very first thing we start with is you need a comprehensive rejection. You can't just reject somebody for one thing and say, hey, give me this one thing, and it turns out you need 10 things that we're missing. And we have this for all our permit types. We have it for our trade permits, our demolition permits, our sign and fence permits, where we have a simple checklist of items that is available on our SharePoint site, which if you're not familiar with SharePoint, it's an internal website that anyone can access. We update it as policy changes. And so we have a transparency with our goal. And you'll see at the very end of each one of those where it says, you know, confirm and validate everything's there, the accuracy is 1 point. And so it's kind of like golf. You want to get as few points as possible. And if people get too many points in a quarter that they're evaluated against, that's considered not meeting expectations for their quality. They're not making our goals. And so if you go to the next slide, you can see this is how we assess people. On the left hand there, this assessment where we give people points and we say this was the permit number you were evaluated on, and this is, you know, what we're checking. That's the whole list that relates to building permits. And then on the right hand side of this slide, you can see close up there, it's the building item number 3. They got 1 point, and they got it because they didn't include the suite number in the description of the permit. And so this is something where you can have a really transparent set of goals. It helps set your team up for success because they know what they expect for you. It helps set your customers up for success because they also know what they're expecting. And I think this is where, for me, all of these soft skills come together. You have to have smart, meaningful goals and metrics because you really need to understand, where are you? What's going on? Are you suddenly having a problem where 2 years ago you could get 90% of your permits processed out or reviewed within the established time frame, and suddenly with the pandemic you're at 75%? And then that relates where you can communicate with your staff clearly. These are the goals, these are expectations. You can communicate with your customers. Hey, you're not going to get your brand new house the day after you submit it. Here's the timelines, here's what's happening, here's how we measure success in Arlington. You can communicate on the budget level, which Sam will talk about next, of, you know, I need more staff because I'm no longer meeting my metrics. I'm no longer meeting my goals. Like it all really works together. And I think this works towards motivation, where you can see, hey, my one team member needs some more motivation, needs some more coaching. Even if they've been there for a while, suddenly we're having things where they're not processing permits in the time period established where they had been. Suddenly we're not meeting quality control. So it all really interworks together too, where your goals should be supporting these other soft skills. And I really want to encourage people, like, ask in the chat, where have you had trouble setting goals? What has been examples of times you tried to set a goal, it wasn't successful, or where have you seen success that you'd want to share? I think the Q&A of these sorts of things really helps make these more engaging. So I would encourage folks to put things in the chat. So that's my time. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak with everyone today, and I'm looking forward to the questions.
Thank you. We're honored for your presentation. We do have one of the panelists. Joey would like to ask you a quick question. Go ahead.
Allison, thanks for your presentation. Just a quick question on the checklist that you mentioned. Just want to understand whether your organization make a conscious effort to keep that checklist simple and straightforward. Because in Singapore, for BCA, we do have a checklist for our processing officers to tick off. But then because we have so many code books and regulations, the checklist keep getting longer, and it's getting very difficult for officers to ensure that they check off every boxes, or whether they are really doing a proper job checking those boxes. So so that was my question.
Yeah, that's a great question. So we do try to keep it straightforward. Like you'll see on the building permit, we only had 23 items. We try to work closely with our plan reviewers too, to understand, like, okay, if we have this problem on a plan, they're probably going to have a lot of other plan review comments. So we might tell them, okay, with a new house, we need a framing plan, but we're not going to get into, is that framing plan signed and sealed? Because if your plans needed to be signed and sealed and they're not, we probably have a whole host of other things that plan review is going to comment. Your beam spans are probably going to be wrong. We're probably going to have a lot of things to chat about. So we try to find that balance where it's a partnership between plan review and the permit specialists. Because our goal really is in Arlington at the end of the day, we want you to get a permit. We want you to build safely. So we don't want to have you do like 10 rounds of my team and do another 10 rounds with plan review. But we do try to keep it simple, straightforward, and we do try to give staff a lot of resources that say like, hey, this is make sure you are licensed for this work. I don't write the whole checklist about what a licensing needs. I say, go to this other resource to see that licensure, or, make sure permit's actually required for this. I don't write out the whole chapter 1 for that. So hope that helps. Great question. Thank you.
As
Thanks.
Stephen said, he talked about communications. Uh, do you communicate that to your contractors, even your elected officials out there, those lists, so they have an understanding of your expectations?
So we have shared on the website things like here's the minimum submission requirements for submitting permits, or here's information about links to DPOR. We don't publish the exact checklist because this sounds a little funny. There is a worry of like, hey, they don't have this item on the checklist. I'm going to slip by it and not worry about it because no one's paying attention to this one thing, And certainly the checklist is not comprehensive of everything in someone's job. We do tell the team like, this is a framework to help people succeed and to kind of evaluate work. We still need people to make discretionary calls, judgment calls. That's where like that mentoring, that coaching, that motivation does come into.
So another question that came in is how much is staff involved in generating the checklist, not just from managers and supervisors, but the frontline people?
Um, so when we built this, so I took over this team about 3 years ago. We did not have these checklists when I took over the team. We had some meetings with the supervisors in plan review and with on my team about general structures, what's the expectations for the job, and then we took it to the team and said, is this reasonable? Are we missing things you do all the time? And it was a collaborative effort, including like how critical is some of this. And so we tried to give frameworks to supervisors and highlight big ticket items. And then staff comes to us and says now, hey, the SharePoint site's out of date. This doesn't make sense. This is unclear. We've been having problems with X. Can we add some support for that? Like we changed our system, so we're going to change the checklist. And so I do really encourage staff to come to me and say like, this doesn't make any sense, or this is in conflict about, this is a year old, this is in conflict about what we talked about for a team meeting. So I do think it's important that it's not just a dictating SMART goals, that there is that communication.
Thank you very much, Allison.
And that's a
Uh,
good comment because, Ron, if I may, in our organization right now, we're trying to see the forest for the trees, and how big is that checklist and how little is that checklist? And part of our problem with the Great Recession, et cetera, is we've had a tremendous changeover in our frontline staff. And so we've got a lot of new folks up front that are not that knowledgeable in the building trades. And so we're trying to train them, and yet the checklist gets too big. And then at the end of the day, we're 7-10 days trying to get plans in and accepted, trying to get down to that 1 to 2 days. That's excellent.
well, thank you all panelists for your contributions, as well as, of course, our people attendees. Sam, it's getting to you. Remember, Sam, make sure you budget in some money for my whiskey, just so we got that straight. Let's go.
Well
It's all
said,
you.
Ron. Well said. Today we've talked a lot about the soft skills in communications and mentorship, et cetera. Now we're going to talk about the soft skills of budgeting. And you say soft skills of budgeting. Budgeting is just a bunch of numbers, but no, it's not. And that leads us to the next slide. The budget, it's more than just a series of numbers on a page. It is an embodiment of our values. That was spoken by Barack Obama several years ago. And regardless of your political style or not, I always like this statement because the budget, it shows what do we want to do in the future. Next slide, please. With that vision, with those values, us as a community, we have to come up, what do we want to do? tight funding is always an issue. So it's critical that the local government tie their budget with a central strategy or a vision. Where are we going? Where are we looking ahead? With that vision, you have to plan your work your plan, stick to your plan, and say no if it's not part of the plan. And then you got to measure your plan. So there's a lot of steps that goes on with that. Next, please. Accountability, is a soft skill. Local governments are accountable to multiple different entities and individuals, which we all must remember. In the United States, typically we're responsible to the voters. And the local citizens faithfully pay their taxes to support local governments. But they also have the expectation that the local governments will take care of them and provide the services they need to have a good growth, good, healthy, productive community. That's critical. Next one. Trust. Trust, firm, belief in the reliability, truth, ability, strength of someone or something, confidence, the certainty and the reliance. You must have trust. Trust is essential for a collaboration and innovation. Mistrust, and it distorts a lot of decision making, keeps the citizens out there, they don't know what's going on. They worry about corruption, they worry about sacrifices and not being better off at the end of the day. On the flip side, when government can increase the citizens' trust with clearer promises of what we can expect, what they can expect from us, then the public sector reforms, et cetera, can bring to the citizens what we have promised. But trust is critical for this system to work. Next, please. Transparency. Budget transparency refers to the full disclosure. When we talk about full disclosure, meaning all relevant financial information, not just the key points or the 1 or 2 points that are in your favor that you want to present. You need to present all your relevant financial information. You need to do it in a timely manner. That doesn't mean 1 hour before budget meeting times or council times or whatnot. Give people the time, the opportunity to take a good look at it. And you need to submit your budgets in a systematic manner. Nowadays, most of the U.S. Agencies, they have a dictated script they need to follow in regards to their budgets. Just for that reason, you can't submit 1,000 pages, jumble them all up, and then resubmit them again and think that people have the time to go through that. It just doesn't work that way. But with transparency, the community members are treated as equal stakeholders, and all are given the opportunity to provide input. It's critical to get them through the budget planning process and the approval process. We need that transparency so that we're all on the same page and we can make the right decisions. Next, please. Communications. Like Stephen says, communications is the key to success. In the budgeting process, I guarantee you will not be successful if some people don't know what the other staff or departments are doing or understand the intent of their actions. You have to have good open communications. You have to address the needs of your staff, of your constituents, etc. You need to get fresh input into the budget, not only from your local folks who you deal with, but from folks outside of your department, outside of your company, to see what's going on around you. You need to be able to have the ability to adjust your budgets up or down based on your findings, based on your input, based on addressing the needs. And at your budget meetings, they need to be open and have good conversations going back and forth so that you can come to an agreement, a meeting of the minds. Next, please. Next one, please. Yeah, negotiation. Negotiation is an interaction and process for parties who aspire to agree, and that part's critical, on matters of mutual interest. And here's the hard part, and while optimizing their own individual desires. Now, there's a lot of red flags that come up in negotiation: political clout, special interest groups. There's a lot of flags that can fly into that. But negotiation is a skill that you can learn. Most people that I've talked to do not enjoy negotiations. They need to flip that around and enjoy it. And you enjoy it by starting by visualizing the possible gains, not the losses. And then you practice and you practice and you practice. And then you look at the strategy according to what's going on. And then you must, in negotiating, you must be flexible, but you have to be sincere about what you need and the other party's needs. You got to learn to read the other party and see what they're thinking and try and get into their head and see what they really need. And at the end of it, you need to be prepared to compromise. That compromise is not a bad word as long as you're aspiring to agree on matters of mutual interest and optimizing your own needs. That compromise is a critical part of negotiating skills, and that we all must learn to be better at. Next, please. Performance. Like Allison was talking about, you're trying to measure what you're doing. At the end of the day, on your budgets, you need to measure how well did you do overall. And according to the sign, if you aren't measuring the right things to begin with, you're not going to get better results by measuring them more accurate. Garbage in, garbage out. You got to make sure you're going to measure the right things. Like Allison was talking about, quality, quantity, efficiency, productivity. Those are some of the key metric items that people with the budgeting process will look at. Again, at the end of the day, did it meet the needs of your citizens, of your department? Did it meet at the end results? Is that what you thought you were going to get out of it? You've got to measure and see how you did. A lot of times we talk about technology. Technology, it's amazing in the last several years, the changes in software and the ability to use that software to check for quality, to check for quantity, to talk about efficiency and whatnot. Technology is something we should not be afraid of. We should be embracing that and using that to our best ability. Some of the best things we've done on customer service is trying to send out there on a routine basis easy surveys out to our customers and say, hey, how are we doing? And if there's one thing we could do better, what would that be? So we can try and build up our repertoire so we know what to do better. Next, please. So what is a budget? In the old English terms, a bouquet is the bag or the wallet. If money is power, then budgeting is the distribution of power. So another way to say that is the budget is the purse of power. Whoever controls the purse strings controls the power. Next. Budgeting politics. Oops. Or what is a budget? It's a series of goals with price tags attached. Everything has a price that goes along with it. And remember, resources will always be limited. That's a global truth. Ideas will always be unlimited. So you got to balance those. The budget is a roadmap to show you how to get there. It's also a mechanism for making choices, i.e., is it in the budget? Is it not in the budget? Where are we at in the budget? Where are we at in the fiscal year? What can we do if we need to make tough choices? A budget is also a web of social as well as legal and political relationships in which you make commitments that are made by all parties. Remember that as the budget is formally adopted, it's not just a slam of the gavel. No, it is a legal document that all of us must follow. And if we don't follow it, we're in legal jeopardy. And as such, we need to make sure we understand our budgets and what's going on. Next, please. Budgeting politics. And believe me, I don't care where you are in this world, politics is politics and it's there. Budgeting, by sort of a definition, is the political process of determining who gives and who gets, while the budget itself is the actual ledger, the ledger book. So if you take the analogy that the budget is the World Series of government, you look at the sign over there on the top, it is the main players in the world coming together because everybody understands that if it doesn't get into the budget, if it isn't budgeted, it's not real. And if it's not real, it's just another political promise. So you got to get it into the budget. You got to play with the 8 players. Next, please. Another way to look at the budget is as a scorecard. If politics are regarded in part as conflict over whose preferences shall prevail in the determination of policy, then the budget records the outcome of the struggle and charts the policy. So whoever wins, whoever has the best decision, best vocal, best arguments, you'll see that as it comes out into the actual budget. You'll have monies funded for it, and those mandates or those initiatives will move forward. It's the political scorecard. And as such, politicians, they're graded on that by our voters. Next, please. Budgets, they can be positive, they can be negative. The local government budgets can have a strong positive or a strong negative impact on staff and the constituents. If you have a strong budgeting strategy, leads to high level of stakeholder and staff engagement, you'll get more input, more understanding, more involvement, more acceptance. On the flip side, if you don't do a good job on the budgets, you're going to lack funds. You're going to have your poor budgeting is going to lead to stagnation, turnover, burnout of staff, as well as your stakeholders. It's just that simple. Those that win at the budgeting scheme of things can take care of their staff, get their initiatives done, and move forward. Hopefully, they're in the same wavelength as their constituents are. But if you don't, and if you have a bad budget year, et cetera, and maybe due to other items, it's going to be tough on you and staff. So budgeting is a key issue. Next, please. So overall, you need to take a strong approach towards budgeting. Challenging budget issues will push you to utilize all the tools in your tool bag, especially your soft skills, in order to achieve the results you want. We talked about having vision. What do you want? What are you looking for? We talked about accountability, being held accountable to your stakeholders, to your staff. We talked about building trust with your stakeholders, with your staff, that you know what you're going on and that they trust you, that they believe in what you say. The transparency of your numbers is there. The communications of your budget going back and forth, staff, the department, your elected officials, your stakeholders, the negotiation back and forth of the budget, making sure that you have a win-win situation, not only with what you need and want, but also what the other parties may also need. And then at the end of the day, again, performance. How well did you do on your budget, and get ready for the next cycle? Next, please. After all, budgeting is politics. Whether we like it or not, budgeting is politics. It's also economics, accounting, planning, control, public relations. Budgeting is all that wrapped up. It's not just a series of pages of numbers. That's budgeting. Next, please. The challenge, as I throw this challenge out to everyone, the challenge to everyone is to stop worrying so much about balancing the budget. Instead, make sure that the decisions you make financially are going to continue to help you be sustainable as an organization for many years to come. If you look to the future, plan for the future, and put your money into the future, you'll be light years ahead. Next, please. And take these figures, Freeble, and shroud them in mystery and legend. And therefore, there's your budget. Thank you.
Okay, before we go on, Allison has some input she would like to make concerning the success that Arlington had. And Sam, you could probably tag on this on the enterprise fund functions. But Allison, please.
So about a decade ago, when my building official came to Arlington permitting services, all of our plan review, our inspections, our permit specialists were funded through taxpayer dollars. We were part of what is frequently referred to in the United States as the general fund. What that means is then, for lack of a better term, you're in competition with every other department. You're in competition with your police department, with your fire department, with your, health department for the budget. And through communication, through transparency, through buy-in from our contractors or developers, our building official got us to move to what's commonly referred to as an enterprise or development fund, where we're fully funded by the permitting fees. And our developers continue to say, I will pay more money if you will get my permit to me faster. And so if you happen to live, and this doesn't work in every community, right? But if you happen to live in a urban community or even a very affluent community where people are willing to pay the fees because they say, I would rather pay you for 2 more plan reviewers and another inspector because I want you to come out and inspect this job site faster. I want you to get these plan reviews done faster. And you can get that buy-in from your community and have your contractors, your developers, even some of your homeowners be the advocates that say, hey, instead of having only 1 or 2 people to do this role, and so we have this large backlog of work, can we better fund this and get these projects going faster? And that ties to your economic development in your community. I mean, Arlington is a world-class, amazing community, and we have incredible projects going on, in part because it is not a huge regulatory hurdle
to get permits. We make sure you build safe. We are committed to building safety. We are committed to codes. We're committed to enforcement. We don't just wave a wand and tell people yes, but we have the budget and the staffing to make that successful. And so I think it's important to share why that's like such a soft skill. I just want to share that as an example where if my building official didn't have those soft skills, if he wasn't able to reach out to our community, if he wasn't able to build that consensus and support, I'm not sure where we would be today, probably super understaffed and overstressed, if I'm honest. And so I wanted to share that as an example for people in different communities around the world where the soft skills of budget really are relevant.
I'm going to add something at that point, and I'm going to make sure that I don't put Sam on the spot. I've been functioning under an enterprise system for 100 years, somewhere along the line there. And we were able to grow to an amazing department of over 700 people, had a $100 million budget, and we had 125 million surplus. That's unheard of. And, but things change all the time. There's a new administration, there's a new building official, and it's not as significant an issue for him. And slowly but surely, they've been eating into that surplus and been providing it to other departments, well within their proviso. But it does change, and some people have a different outlook on how that goes. I don't know, Sam. Should I put you on the spot and say anything?
You're a good man.
Okay.
Progress pays for itself, and in the enterprise fund way, Allison, you're exactly right. When you need new construction, new homes, new buildings, new freeways, etc., the enterprise fund is a great mechanism for providing that. Otherwise, like you said, you're in competition with everybody from the general funds, and that is a challenge. And we ride the waves as the construction moves and goes up. The enterprise goes up, and as the construction fades down and whatnot, the enterprise fund has a tendency to go down also. Something you have to deal with and make good decisions.
Stephen, I guess you might have some input here, right?
Yeah, I was just going to add, Rod, there's been a theme across the three presentations, which have all been fantastic. So thanks for putting me on first. I would be difficult to be the last one today. But the theme is about essentially the human nature side of bad news versus good news. We all want to be the person delivering good news, not bad news. But actually, whether it's Allison's quick turnaround on permits that are not suitable at application stage, to me, that's critical. I use a phrase, bad news fast. There's only one thing worse than bad news, and that's bad news that's delivered slowly or slower than the person receiving it thinks is reasonable. And whether it's Ju Yi's points about motivating staff or even Sam's point about budget, we need to learn a core skill is giving bad news when it's necessary quickly. Don't leave a building site with a smile on your face when you've got bad news for a builder. At least give them some indication that there's going to be something that's going to follow up, because otherwise people will respond in a much more strong and strident way. So it's a difficult thing. We all of us want to be the deliverer of good news, but our jobs require us from time to time to deliver bad news. Just do it quickly.
If you don't do it quickly, like you said, it's going to stagnate, it's going to ferment. You shove it under the table or under the rug, it's only going to get worse. It's not going to get better. Bite the bullet, put it on top of the table, deal with it, and move on. Otherwise, it's not going to be fun.
One of the inputs we got from Mr. Willis, he indicated checklists must be a living, breathing document. I think we all concur with updates. And what is best is to actually use an appropriate notation so that the updates are noted specifically, and that way they can be reconstructed as it evolves and your community evolves.
Ron, I'd love to jump on that, where I think this is where digital, and maybe Julie has some perspective on this since you're going digital. I think that's where that's a huge tool for us. Like when I first got into the industry, it's like, here's a paper binder. Good luck, versus like now we can put all this out digitally. We can update it live. I don't have to pass out things to folks constantly. I think a really nice thing to leverage that and be able to make that change like really quickly, and then keep a log at the bottom of the page that says on these date I made these changes, versus, printing stuff out and having binders and relying on emails and things. It's really different. But I'd love to hear some different perspectives, especially as people switching over to a more digital process.
One thing you have to respect is accountability, and that goes with the transparency. so that there has to be or should be a system by which those managers who are in charge sign off on that. So if there's a question later, it can be reconstructed.
Allison, with the pandemic and whatnot, we switched literally overnight from a paper system, 95, 98% paper, to basically 99, 100% electronic system. One of the things we never really realized, and it has bitten us many times, is electronic submittals 24/7. We go home, we have the paper submittals, we go home Friday night, 5 o'clock, doors are shut, systems are off. Yep. Nowadays, doesn't matter. 24/7, holidays don't count, Christmas doesn't count. You can submit as fast as you want, and on Monday morning, the phone rings and says, where's my permit?
Right. Yeah, maybe I can add to that. Yeah,
Definitely.
digitalization is a double-edged sword, just like what Sam says. Now we're expected to work 24 hours. In Singapore, our permitting system is internet-based. So architects and engineers, they are called qualified persons. So qualified person can make submission anytime, anywhere in the world, okay, through the internet. And we do have certain framework or time to respond to those applications. But I just want to touch on digitalization. So with digitalization, yes, we are collecting a lot of data, and this data are helpful in monitoring our productivity, setting goals, like what Allison says, and this data is help us to also shape our policies and our rules. But at the same time, the use of data also means that we are accountable for those data. Okay, so when we collect those data, it's important that we communicate to the industry that we are safeguarding this data carefully. Okay, and on that, there's something to related to Sam's topic about budget. Okay, with more technology, you need to buy more tools, and these tools are not cheap. And the most expensive element about these tools are the license and the security to secure those data. These are really expensive, and over the years, I must say, my organization has to commit a lot more budget just to upgrade or increase the security of our system, because we are collecting more information from our citizens and from our industry partners. Yeah, that must be budgeted for.
When I took over building, we had a number of vehicles. They still have a number of vehicles. Anecdotally, vehicles would break down because we'd end up getting the police cars, old vehicles. They'd have 100,000 miles and they were garbage and trash. And I went through all the analysis of showing a motivation component of having upgraded vehicles, having them efficient and effective, and having radios that work, etc. But really, the telling part was the budget, where I showed that every time a vehicle broke down, which they tended to, we were losing a day for two inspectors out in the field. One to go pick the guy up, bring him back or gal up, one to go service it, run the vehicle around. When I was able to explain it in numbers, if you will, this is how much it costs, this is how much we can save, quite literally the next year I had new vehicles. And how that benefited, it was long term. Not only we have new vehicles, we perpetuated the new vehicles, because when we sold our vehicles, we got to keep the money. So that's really another advantage of an enterprise fund. It's our money, we keep it, and are able to continue to grow with it. Is there any other input from anyone that would like to?
I was just going to add, Ron, this whole idea of digitization extends to, which is probably another topic for perhaps the next webinar, but the whole concept of building inspection was an independent set of eyes on site. But now every person on site, literally every person, has a high definition video audio transmission system in their pocket. And how much we can rely upon that is something that we're certainly discussing here in Australia at a very high policy level, because we have a country about the size of America, but 1/12 the population. We have the tyranny of distance, the budget cost of traveling a long way for what might be a 10-minute inspection. But we're reluctant, and again, Julie, I'm interested in your view, we're reluctant to trust people yet to hold that mobile phone, and point to something, and how we would capture that, trust it, and then record that, rather than let go of what are, frankly, an old-fashioned concept of physical inspections.
Well, see nothing else, I'm going to ask each of the panelists, you can go in any order, to share a takeaway about what element of building officials' mindset maybe should change, could change to improve the soft skills set? Because after all, we get tied up so often in the technical aspects. So, Stephen, I'll start with you because we started with you.
Thanks, Ron. Look, I think one of the things I've learned over my career is that as you get older, you get a bit more tolerant. I know traditionally we're the grumpy old men, Ron, but I think learning to understand that people are different to yourself, and particularly that building officials as a group are perhaps not typical of the average person, learning to understand that the audience has a different view of things than we do and trying to engage with them in that way.
Thank you. Uh, Chewy, do you have anything to impart? Final words of wisdom?
Yeah. Okay. Before I became a regulator, actually, I was a practicing architect. So when I became a regulator, some of my colleagues say, "Hey, you think differently." I think one of the important aspects of being a regulator is that we must stand in the shoes of those practitioners, industry practitioners and developers who are submitting plans to us and subjected to our checks and regulations. So that's important, and that's one important element of how understanding our customers and how we communicate with them. I thought that is extremely important.
Thank you. Allison, from your global emerging leaders perspective.
So that's funny you say that, because I think the big takeaway that comes up again and again that I would encourage people to continue the commitment ICC has started, but is an ongoing change of mindset, is we have people across the industry, whether you're the contractor building, the design professional designing it, the engineer and analyzing it, or you're the regulatory body. We have so many new folks coming up, and I think communicating to the person on the private industry side about, hey, maybe we can work through this code compliance problem rather than being like, hey, this is your problem, go figure it out. I mean, we've had a lot of success in building education, not just within our own team in Arlington, but also with our partners in the development and the construction industry, because we're willing to go out there and communicate. We're willing to build that trust and relationship. We're willing to have a motivation for our internal staff about how to work with folks and for our external stakeholders. I think that's a big takeaway, is really have that motivation, have that mentorship, have that communication, and then they'll come support you on your budget side of the things, or they'll help you when you fall short on the goals like we sometimes do and go, hey, we got a new permitting system and I don't know what's going on. Give me some patience and some leeway. If you have that relationship, and I'd encourage people, like, build that out. I know us young people are a little annoying with the things you would think we would have learned in school or would have known, but reach out, have that mindset.
Thank you. Sam, what you got?
To build on what Allison is saying, as the AHJ, the authority having jurisdiction / building official / regulator, our job is to make sure things are life safe, no questions. And as such, we think we have we think you have big shoulders, and we think we got to make the decision. We got to remember we have a multitude of resources that are out there. Yeah, reach out to your fellow building officials across the country, let alone across the world, when you have specific issues or specific problems. Listen, get a better feel for what's going on and what the specific issues are. One of us around this world have dealt with whatever issue you may be working with. Use that expertise, bring that in there, and make better decisions. Listen and make better decisions. Build your repertoire of friends, mentorships, and build that camaraderie out there so we can build a better world.
Thank you, Sam. I want to reemphasize that point, as well as thanking all the panelists who have taken their time to participate. And I really want to appreciate those who took part in this session, that listen and have an opportunity to learn. I hope we all grow. We are going to be working on the possibility of sharing certain slides. So if people miss something, they can be able to pick it up, because after all, we're looking at a learning opportunity here. As far as us getting into some of these older things, I can't think of anyone older than me, so I'm not going to say any more. With that, so, we constantly change. We are one community. When I talk to people around the world, I've been to some like 36 countries, I emphasize that you can pick up the phone at any time, and talking to ICC or talking to a code official in a jurisdiction of similar size or who had the same problems is going to be such a wonderful tool to make your life easier. please make use of that tool. See, is there anything else? I got a cheers. I like that. I'll take that anytime. Uh, with that, Judy, what else can we do here? Do you have a sign off slide? But I
I'll put a
can't.
sign off slide on,
Thank you.
and I thank everyone for joining us.
Again, thank you. You honor us by your attendance.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Maybe I don't have one.
Okay. Well,
Thank
I'll
you,
say
everyone.
I'm going to give you Judy's home phone number so you can communicate with her at your leisure to get anything you want. Of course, certainly through ICC, .safe.org, .safe, whatever. You can get the information you need. And I don't know if you've got my email address, but I'll give you Sam's email address. And you can certainly access Sam anytime you'd like. Thank you very much. With that, I think we're signing off. Bye, everyone. And
Yeah.
thank you, panel.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much.